Yes, that's the title of the program today. In March, the dying began. My name is Stan Husted. I'm the leader of the Jesus Entrepreneur Experience, the lead broadcaster, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Christian Entrepreneur Network, and we have some stories to tell you today. I want you to understand that living the Christian faith is truly, life is difficult, because when we live the Christian life, we are not exempt from all of the difficulties of life. And so, we press on. But one of the things that we're going to discover is, even though it's really hard to believe it sometimes, is the gentleman who said to me, you know what? What the Judeo-Christian tradition did was helped us to better understand that indeed God is a God of pathos. He really cares. And I'd like to talk about that today on the Christian Entrepreneur Network and the Jesus Entrepreneur Experience, and a story just for you.
He careth for you. He careth for you. When the worries and cares of your life seem to block out the rays of His light, never forget, never lose sight, for He careth for you, for He careth for you.
Yes, we are back. And as I studied that Jewish philosopher, his name was Abraham Heschel, he said, the word is pathetic, but unfortunately the word has a misnomer to it because it comes from the word pathos. And the word pathos simply means that a person possesses deep feelings for others. And what happened is that the Christian, the Judeo, the one God that comes out of that experience was a God of profound pathos. It was a God that cared, and cared deeply for you and for me. For a number of years, Bob Ketcherson, a good friend of mine, and we did a program that went all over the world. And since we were located on the Bonaire, Netherlands Antilles island, right in the middle there, it was called Caribbean Night Call. And it was late night music and musings and thoughts. And we always began with the same theme. And it was that song, He Careth for You. Yes, He careth for you. And we wanted people to remember that even though life is going to be challenging and sometimes crisis confronting, that we were trying to remember that indeed it is true that God cares for you. But sometimes that's hard to believe, and sometimes it's hard to experience. However, I was very deeply moved by something that I'm involved in right now. As many of you know, that as the Christian Entrepreneur Network, we have a whole variety of services that will help you build your business. And we're going to help you write a book. And we're going to help you perform that book and use that book to market yourself and to build your business and expand your brand. And recently I've been working with a gentleman who has written a wonderful book. He's a doctor and certainly an entrepreneur in his faith and practices, and a long-time man who's been involved in missionary and medical and global health for a number of years. And he wrote a book called Such a Time of It They Had. Such a Time of It They Had, Global Health Pioneers in Africa. And it is a story of the early medical missionary and global health work, because the medical missionaries were the first global health workers, and how that story and how that enterprise began in Africa in the 19th century. It's an incredible book. It's a wonderful book. And I've learned so much from it. And it is truly parabolic in the sense that not only do you get the story and the history, but very, very powerfully messages and meanings and themes and ways of perhaps even changing how we think about things are woven into the story by Dr. Raymond Downing. And what Dr. Downing did, he said, hey, I've heard about audiobooks, but I've also heard about there are some people today who are actually thinking of making their book into a podcast. And I said, yes, I've heard of that. I've never done that. I've done hundreds of audiobooks. And of course, I am now doing my third different podcast, a book into a podcast. Let's see if we can do that. Well, it is an experiment for sure. But we have decided that this experiment is working, that the book is every week it comes out in a podcast. And this past week I did chapter 5. And today I'm going to try to get through chapter 5 again, because as I read that chapter about two missionary families that were the early pioneers, and the deep tragedy that befell them and their family as a result of their deep commitment to God and their faith and one another, I was so deeply moved by their courage and their faith. I actually started to tear up and almost weep as I heard the story. And what I'd like to do for you today is certainly to help you understand that these things happen, but perhaps we can be comforted and encouraged, and certainly pray for others as we hear the story of what these dear people went through in their desire to live out the mission of helping other people, to bring health and well-being to other people. And it's framed around the story that many people have heard of Dr. David Livingstone, who attempted to do something, and they attempted to help him, and it ended tragically. But the legend goes on, and the faith goes on, and so if you wish, I would just be grateful if you would take a few minutes while I read you and maybe share with you the story of this dear people of God who then went through the experience, and what it might mean to you and your heart, mind, and spirit, and how we pray and care for one another. So please take time to join me for a brief section of What a Time of It They Had by Dr. Raymond Downing, and the excerpt from chapter 5. In March, the dying started. Let's listen. Let him who has ears, let him hear. Just a brief preface. Dr. David Livingstone, the famous missionary, has decided that he wants to set up a mission station in a certain location up from the north of the Cape, South Africa. And so two families have agreed, even though they're a bit afraid, to lead the way, and they're going to meet Dr. Livingstone there, and something goes wrong. Dr. Livingstone is not able to get there for 5 months, and they start out, and this is what happened. Finally, on July 8, 1859, the group started, not knowing that Livingstone had already given up exploring the Zambezi westward and had moved his focus to the Malawi highlands. In the group were 15 adults and 6 children. Roger and Isabella Price. She was pregnant and would deliver on the way. Holloway and Ann Helmore with their 4 children and about a dozen local people to lead the journey, drive the 3 ox-drawn wagons, herd the cattle and sheep, and generally help out. And then the story goes into a recitation of the deep difficulties. They went through areas where literally there was no water, and the thirst, and the desire for water was just overwhelming. At the same time, the equipment they had, the ox-drawn wagons, just like some of the settlers around the world, were continually breaking down. And it was an incredible journey just to make it to the place where they were going to stay to meet up with the doctor and then begin to go to what would be a healthier place, and there they would start their mission. And here is how the story goes. At the Chobe River, now the border between Botswana and the Caprivi Strip of Namibia, they had to dismantle their wagons to get them towed across the river. Arriving in town, Sekatutu slaughtered an ox for them. But the people in town wouldn't sell them goats or corn. This is, Isabella wrote, a most unhealthy place. More than that, nothing had been heard from Livingstone, and Sekalutu, now that's the chief, people had no plans for moving to a healthier area. The whole point they had been led to believe of their journey to Linyati, Sekalutu told them to remain there until Livingstone arrived. Every day, Isabella noted in her journal, one or the other of the men was taken ill. And the place, she prophesied, will not agree long with any of us. And then, in March, the dying started. From her journal, March 3rd. All are now down with this nasty slow fever, every one of the Helmores, poor things, so that one cannot help the other. Molodzi, Price's driver, after severe struggling, breathed his last. Oh, we are very grieved. When the other men return home and carry to his friends the sad tidings of his death, alas, how will their hearts bleed? He had been so faithful to us of late, and of dear baby he was so fond of, which made me like him none the less. March 7th. As Roger went to look around at the invalids this evening, he found dear little Henry cold in death. He communicated the sad news to his father, who bore the trials with marked calmness. His mother has not been told. Oh, how fond she was of him, and a sweeter child there could certainly not be. Roger had the dear little fellow removed at once and sewn up in a piece of carpeting. He was hastily buried by the side of Molodzi. Oh, how I wish he could get away from here. Oh, how I wish we could get away from here, especially for our baby's sake. She looks pale and does not seem so well. Roger, too, is feeling low. March 9th. Oh, Providence, how mysteriously art thou dealing with us. My own sweet little one has today taken her flight from us. I saw a change in her countenance this morning, and determined to keep her in my arms altogether. She took no food yesterday, and this morning refused the breast. Roger suffered much this morning from oppression of the chest, and just before midday wished for a cold sheet. I refused to help him at first, as I saw my precious one was dying, but on finding it really needed, I laid her on the mattress for a few minutes while I attended Roger. She turned her head and gave me a look, then to the other side and gave her Papa a look. I seized her to my bosom and gave her a press. Then laying her on my lap, I found her eyes were fixed, and she ceased to breathe. Immediately I washed her and dressed her in that dear little nightgown which Mamma gave me, and the precious little bundle was laid in the grave by the side of Henry. Oh, I do feel lonely tonight. My little one was pretty, very pretty, and her disposition was very sweet. I did not murmur. I feel I can say, Thy will be done. But my heart bleeds at the parting. My heart's desire is that I may become more holy and devoted to the service of my Master. March 10th. Today I have busied myself with the invalids. The Helmores lie in a wretched condition. Mrs. Helmore is almost unconscious. Selina is evidently near death. Some of the men are dangerously ill. March 11th. Again waited upon the invalids. Mrs. Helmore very ill through the night. I have some hope of her recovery. This afternoon, dear little Selina died. One of the men went into the tent and found her lying close to her father, quite dead. She too was hastily buried. Roger, though very weak, sewed her up in a quilt, and she was laid by the side of our darling. So dear baby lies between the brother and the sister. Thabi, too, the native teacher who has accompanied us, died this evening, a few hours after Selina, and was buried by her side. Now 5 of our number have been called away. Who will be next? That passage of Scripture, "Be still and know that I am God," has much calmed me today. March 12th. This morning when I went to the tent, I found Mrs. Helmore dying. Her husband, who seemed almost indifferent when the children died, was sitting up by her side and asked her if she still breathed. Ah, she breathed, not much longer, and a half an hour after, her spirit had fled. She was wrapped in a long strip of calico, and she too was borne to the tomb. Poor Mr. Helmore seems wonderfully calm, but there is a certain sort of indifference to everything manifested by most of this fever. They just lie like sheep and sleep, except when extreme restlessness prevents them. Then they seem too wretched to think of anything but their own suffering. Then Isabella herself became ill, and made no entries into her journal for 2 months. On May 26 she took up the story again. I think I am just now recovering from a long and severe illness. Poor Mr. Helmore is no more, so his 2 orphans are now in our charge. He had recovered from his fever and was getting quite strong, but on visiting Sekalutu, who was down with fever, the return walk was too much for him, and threw him into fever again. Oh, it was sad indeed to see him borne to the tomb. He was the truest and sincerest Christian. The old man who drove Mr. Helmore's sheep has also breathed his last several weeks before Mr. Helmore, so that there now lies in the grave 8 of our small company. Mr. Helmore's 2 dear children, Lizzie and Willie, of course, will live with us. The story continued, and it was the story of these 2 wonderful families who had gone up to do the good things that they were called to do. Unfortunately, Dr. Livingstone never did arrive, and they had to return to South Africa, but by that time most of the company had died. There were just a few left, and the mission failed. Dr. Livingstone never was able to return. He felt terrible, had wished that they had used the quinine, but he wasn't there to help them with that. And they had walked into the area where sleeping sickness and, worst of all, malaria had its run of the area. It was not a healthy place, and the family of both was almost completely wiped out, along with all of their assistants and helpers and people who cared and loved them. That story has moved me greatly. That story has moved me deeply. Certainly those of us who follow the living God oftentimes look up to heaven and say, "Hey, we're your friends. Why is this happening?" And of course, as I read this, I kind of felt those same things. God, these people loved you. Why do you do this? And that's oftentimes the eternal mystery of all of our tragedies and of all of our suffering. But what moved me more was the deep faith and courage of these medical missionary entrepreneurs. Indeed, the dying had started, and they died, and they served, and they loved and cared for one another. And I have to believe, and I do believe, that in God's great eternal plan, that all of this will someday truly be healed, and they are made whole. Just thought I would tell you that story because it moved my heart. And maybe it will encourage you to think deeply and more profoundly, but perhaps even read the story yourself and say, what is this teaching me about my own life, my own faith, and my own courage to press on. I'm Stan Houston. This is the Jesus Entrepreneur. Thank you for your time. If you'd like to know more about this book, please write to me at radioedge77@gmail.com, radioedge77@gmail.com. Again, I would encourage you to get the book, and you can find it in all the places where you get books. It's called Such a Time of It They Had, Global Health Pioneers in Africa, written by my good friend, Dr. Raymond Downey. Jesus often said, "Let him who has ears, let him hear." I don't know what this story could mean to you or what it should mean to you. I'm still trying to figure out what it may mean to me, except that my heart was moved in love and compassion for these dear and wonderful people who suffered so bravely and died courageously in service of the master entrepreneur. I'm Stan Houston. I wish you all the best and blessings and whatever tragedy you are enduring or difficulty going through. I truly will say with you that even in all of that, we have to remember that just as we did every night, God, He careth for you. And may you experience that care today, right now. Bye for now.
He careth for you. He careth for you. When the worries and cares of your life seem to block out the rays of His light, never forget, never lose sight, for He careth for you, for He careth for you.